Imagine if I walked through that door and told you that I was your son.
That would be a kicker.
Season 7 of Once Upon a Time has officially arrived, so let's find out what our returning and new characters are up to right here on What Happened. What's going on, y'all? Lisa here, and the time has come for me to start recapping Once Upon a Time. Now, the new storybook for Season 7 has officially been opened, but before I break down the whole episode, I'm just going to give you a real quick guide and reminder to the characters and their names and fairy tale counterparts that we know so far. We have grown-up Henry and his daughter Lucy. Lucy's mom is Jacinda, whose counterpart is Cinderella. Jacinda's roommate is Sabine, whose counterpart is Tiana. Jacinda's stepmother is Victoria Belfry, aka Lady Tremaine, who has a daughter named Ivy, whose counterpart is Drizella. As for our returning phase, we have Regina, who is now Ronnie, a bar owner. Hook is Rogers, a cop who becomes a detective and ends up getting partnered with Detective Weaver, who we find out is Rumple. Oh, and one new character I almost forgot to mention is Tilly, who seems to be one of Weaver's minions or allies, whose counterpart is Alice from Alice in Wonderland. Now for the episode, it opens with a scene that was shown previously with Regina and Henry is played by Jared Gilmore, and instead of heading off to college, he's determined to figure out his own story. And he realized that there's hundreds of books out there with other stories he thought he knew, but they're actually different. And he points out how there is a French Snow White, there's an Italian Snow White, so there's endless possibilities of where he can go and what he can find. So he's setting off to find out where he belongs, but it seems like he may only have one being, so getting back to their realm, like the real world, might be an adventure for him. Okay, for the recap, I'm actually going to break down what happens in the fairy tale realm, and then I'll go do the same for the real world, or what we call Hyperion Heights. We catch a grown-up Henry who is speeding around on his motorcycle and ends up crashing into a horse and carriage, which just happens to belong to Cinderella. I know people have been asking this question since this clip was released early, like, how does Henry keep his motorcycle running all these years? Like, did he find ways to portal back and forth so he could get to a gas station? Did he find some kind of alternative fuel source like Back to the Future 2? Still so many questions here. Cinderella is now going to be late to the ball and her horse Philippe has run off, so Henry offers to give her a ride on his headless horse contraption, or his motorcycle. Henry ends up showing Cinderella how the motorcycle works, and Henry's blabbing about how he knows her story, and Cinderella takes a little bit of an interest in asking how her story ends. Now, as Henry is rattling off Cinderella's story to her, it turns out she's using that as a decoy or a distraction, as Cinderella points out a lot of times throughout this episode that she doesn't believe in signs. And then she asks Henry, what if my story had a twist? And she creates her own twist by punching Henry straight in the face and stealing his motorcycle. Who knew Cinderella was so badass back then, right? Back at the castle, we meet evil Lady Tremaine, who has captured Cinderella's fairy godmother and cut off her wings. Yeah. When Drizella walks in, Lady Tremaine gives her some advice. She points out how one should never rely on magic because it can be taken. Rely on fear because it lasts forever, which is definitely something Lady Tremaine's counterpart, Victoria Belfry, lives by. Lady Tremaine then proves her evilness by using the fairy godmother's own wand to bibbidi-bobbidi-boo and disintegrate her. When Cinderella arrives at the ball, we get our first glimpse of Princess Tiana.
No, frog legs. No. No, thank you.
Henry shows up right after Cinderella and is offered a drink as he follows her, and of course, he takes it. Cinderella's then on her way to approaching the prince when Henry intercepts her for a dance, and we learn Cinderella's actually stolen Henry's dagger as well, and she's actually at the ball because the prince took something from her, and not just something, he took everything from her, so she's out to kill the prince. Yeah, that's not the typical Cinderella story we know, is it? Henry tries to stop Cinderella by proposing that she comes back with him because he knows a place where everyone can get a fresh start all the time, and it's where he's actually going later that night. Cinderella declines and goes off to find the prince as Henry starts to feel woozy from that drink he had earlier and falls to the ground as the waitress who gave it to him looks at him and kind of gives him a smile. When Henry comes to, he's tangled in vines only to discover he's been captured by Alice from Alice in Wonderland, or just Alice as I think she wants to be called because she's quick to point out she's been to a lot of other places too. Alice has captured Henry so he doesn't interfere with Cinderella's story because it's not his story, and we learn she was given those orders kind of from Rumple, who's been watching over Henry this whole time. Alice points out that it's not Henry's story, and if he messes with someone else's story, bad things can happen. But of course, Henry, he's not going to listen, and he heads back to the ball. Back at the ball, Cinderella is about to try to stab the prince, but she stops herself and says she can't do it. Unfortunately for her, though, someone is right there waiting to finish the dirty work, and it is Lady Tremaine who stabs the prince in the back because he rejected Drizella. And then, of course, Lady Tremaine frames Cinderella for the murder. Henry shows up just in time to help ward off the guards, and Cinderella makes her escape, and he tells her to take the motorcycle and meet him where they met. And like I said earlier, Cinderella's pretty badass in this version. Like, watch the way she swings this sword. When Henry returns to the spot where he met Cinderella, she's nowhere in sight, and his alarm goes off pointing out it's midnight, so he sees his portal open to go back to what I'm assuming is the real world, or whatever place he kind of came from. Something catches his eye though, and he ends up finding Cinderella's glass slipper, so he decides to let the portal close and commence Operation Glass Slipper. Now, let's go over to Hyperion Heights, where grown-up Henry drives a Prius. So of course, what is his job? It's a Swift driver, that's Swift with a Y, which is basically Lyft or Uber. Also, no offense to Prius drivers out there. I know the car is just super common, which is why it's pretty common also for those car services. After a night of work, Henry returns home, plops down his keys, which we see has a swan pendant on it, and he opens his laptop to start writing, but we see that he has writer's block. He then gets a knock on the door, and we get the scene we saw at the end of the last season with a girl named Lucy knocking on the apartment door 815, which is a nice little throwback to the first episode of the show where the clock tower was stuck at 815. She claims to be Henry's daughter, plops down his book, and said she basically needs him to come back to Hyperion Heights with her because it's like Storybrooke. She's living with his family and a bunch of cursed fairy tale characters. He needs to come back and basically help save the town from Victoria Belfry, who is buying it all up and pushing all the fairy tale characters out and moving humans in. He also needs to come to meet his one true love, Cinderella. Henry, of course, believes nothing that Lucy is saying, and she's just like, oh, this is because of your cursed memories, whatever, but yeah. Eventually, Henry's like, I'm not going. A little bit later, Henry goes to find his laptop, and he finds that it's missing, and there's a ransom note from Lucy telling him that if he wants it back, he's got to come to Ronnie's in Hyperion Heights. As Henry arrives outside Ronnie's, there's this kind of weird lady standing on top of the building who then jumps down in front of him, kind of gives him this stare and walks off. We learn that is Tilly, who ends up going to ask for a guy named Weaver, who we see is holding some guy's head underwater in a bucket, demanding to know information or something. And yeah, Weaver is Rumple, of course, who seems to be quite the enforcer here. Henry goes into Ronnie's, and Ronnie reveals that at midnight, her bar becomes property of Victoria, who was trying to change the town by buying everything in it. It's no longer the community it used to be. We then meet Jacinda, Cinderella's counterpart, who is running through town because she's late for work at Mr. Cluck's Chicken Shack. She gets yelled at by her boss for being late and then calls him a jerk and stands up for herself, and he demands an apology, but Jacinda doesn't give it, so she quits. Then she goes home, where we meet her roommate Sabine. Now Lucy is supposed to go stay with Grandma Victoria, but Jacinda discovers that Lucy is not there. And then we go over to the Belfry Towers, where Ivy is getting everyone up and ready for the arrival of her mother, because everything seems to have to be perfect for Victoria, but Victoria immediately demands to know where Lucy is. Jacinda finds Lucy at a fountain in the middle of what used to be a nice garden, and Lucy explains what she's been up to all day, which is basically trying to find her father, or that she found her father, and of course her mother does not approve of this. Jacinda then goes to Ronnie's to give Henry his computer back, and it feels kind of like love at first sight for our boy Henry.
What?
Nothing.
The two sit and talk, and Jacinda reveals her dream for her and Lucy to him before Veronica comes strolling in like she owns the place, which she doesn't quite yet, but she might be about to. Victoria informs Jacinda that as of the next day, Lucy is going to be moving back in with her because Jacinda is basically an unfit mother. Henry then goes to leave and finds that his car's been stolen, so he goes to the oh-so-convenient police station right down the street, where we get our first glimpse at Rogers, who wears a black glove on his hand, so poor guy still hasn't gotten both his hands. The police process is going to take so long that Henry decides he's going to go look for his car on his own, and runs into Lucy, who continues to insist that he stays and helps out, and that she's his daughter. Henry then reveals to Lucy that he in fact had a wife and kid, but he lost them in a fire, but Lucy insists that those are just his cursed memories. Jacinda then shows up to take Lucy, but not to take her home. Instead, she's planning to leave Hyperion Heights to kind of go to that island she was telling Henry about. That's her dream. Well, Jacinda's car breaks down right before the town line, which Lucy points out has to be the curse. And Jacinda's like, well, we're going to take the ferry, but Lucy actually refuses to go. Meanwhile, Henry has returned to the police station, and that's when Victoria walks in to ask about Lucy, if anybody's seen her, and Henry ends up spilling the beans about where they would have gone. Then Ivy and Rogers show up at the ferry to pick up Lucy, which of course ruins Jacinda's dreams of running off, and Ivy also takes Lucy's Once Upon a Time book and gives it to Rogers to get rid of, and we see him flip through it, and something seems to catch his eye. Henry ends up getting his car back, and of course Jacinda is right there to confront him about ratting her out. When Rogers returns to the police station, he gets congratulated because he learns he's made detective because it looks like Victoria was impressed with him. He then goes to meet his new partner, who is that guy we saw torturing someone earlier, Weaver. Yeah, so it looks like Weaver's definitely some kind of maybe dirty detective, which is gonna be fun to see. We also see that the thing in Lucy's book that caught Roger's eye is a picture of Emma Swan. And we know that next episode we're going to get to learn what happened with Hook and Emma as Jennifer Morrison returns for her one last episode. As the episode starts to come to a close, we see Victoria walk into Ronnie's with the papers to sign, but Ronnie says she is inspired by Jacinda and she's not selling to Victoria. She's not gonna, just give things up that easily. The bar is her home and her life. And I have to say, I really do like this version of Regina. I like Ronnie. She's like I said, really badass and confident, but also really cool and laid back, and I'm excited to see more of her. Jacinda ends up having to go back to ask for her job, and as she's sweeping, she finds a quarter, which she goes and plops into the same fountain that Lucy made a wish in earlier in the episode. As she walks away, a hyacinth flower starts to grow in that garden. So what on earth did Jacinda wish for? Now that flower is actually pretty significant in this episode, as it's seen many times. When Henry and Cinderella first meet, there's a bunch of those flowers in the field. Henry then brings one to Cinderella at the ball, and then we also see Henry with a bouquet of those flowers in Hyperion Heights. And it looks like he's going to visit the graveyard where he thinks his family is buried, but it turns out there's no graveyard there. And the lady walking by says there's never been one. So I think Henry's starting to realize something is off with what he remembers. But either way, he is inspired and returns home to start writing. He erases that placeholder and starts to write Once Upon a Time. Okay, I actually gotta say that was a fun premiere. I know a lot of us were skeptical, didn't know what to expect with this reset, but it was fun. There's so many new characters that got introduced, so we didn't really get a lot of Tion in this episode, but expect a lot more from her. And I'm definitely intrigued by the Tilly-Weaver relationship, and why does she work for him? Also curious to know if any of the characters are actually awake in Hyperion Heights. I kind of feel like Victoria has to be, maybe, since it's said that she's driving fairy tale characters out of the city. How would she know who was a fairy tale character? Also, I feel like Weaver has to be totally awake, right? Him and Alice maybe, since they seem to kind of be watching over everything. So after this premiere, I'm kind of excited for the rest of this season. Like I said, I didn't want to judge it till I watched this episode, but it caught my attention and I am intrigued. I do miss some of the old characters, but I'm okay with these new ones. And I'm also, we got Emma coming back in the next episode, we have Belle coming back in episode 4, and Selena returning as a recurring character. So there's plenty in store for old fans and new fans. Now let's take a look at the promo for next week.
Next Friday,
Cinderella must never see that man again.
Henry's in trouble.
Kill him.
Hook's seeing double.
We have to talk.
And guess who's back to help with their struggles?
Who's here? Is she okay?
I'm never gonna be okay with being apart. Do you want to come back?
Alright, Oncers, now it is your time to weigh in on the Season 7 premiere of Once Upon a Time. What did you think of this little reset? Which of these new characters do you want to know more about? Who do you think is maybe awake and who isn't? It was also said that some of the characters are actually scattered and might be in different towns. So is that maybe how Zelina's counterpart might come in, because we don't see her in Hyperion Heights yet? I don't know. Let me know what you think and leave all your thoughts and comments down below, and then you can click over here to watch me geek out over Once Upon a Time with superfan Yvette Nicole Brown, or watch my interviews with her and the rest of the cast of The Mayor. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm Lisa. I'll see you next episode.